How's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in today's episode, I thought I'd try to say something about the French philosopher and writer Albert Camus and his book, The Rebel. And I want to say something about it because, as I see it, the central message there is pretty timely and relevant today. It's both a sad and a dangerous fact that today we are in a time marked by immoderation and extremes and by binary thinking and by absolutist ideologies. We would do well to take some time to read The Rebel. Okay, so let me just jump right into it. So in his book, The Rebel, published in 1951, Camus attacks all such extremes that I just mentioned there. And in particular, he attacks revolutions and revolutionary thinking. And instead, what he tries to argue for is a version of rebellion or opposition that's marked by some degree of measure or moderation. But before I get to measure or moderation, let's back up a bit. So what Camus does in The Rebel is he distinguishes between what he calls rebellion and what he calls revolution. Now, actually, for him, these do both have a shared starting point. And that is that, broadly speaking, they can both be understood as the human impulse to revolt against, as he says, an unjust and an incomprehensible condition. In other words, they both share a common impetus to protest and fight oppression of all sorts. Okay, but despite this initial common impetus, rebellion and revolution, they quickly diverge from one another, says Camus. Basically, rebellion becomes revolution when it becomes excessive. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that rebellion mutates into revolution when it justifies killing or murder in the name of redressing grievances. Or more specifically, what separates revolution from rebellion is that revolution turns ideological. And so because of this, it's able to justify sacrificing human beings in the name of abstract ideas or some utopian end or some singular purpose. And here Camus is speaking of the French Revolution up through the Russian revolutions and to Nazism. In other words, murder can be excused as rational and necessary if it leads to the right ends and to progress, as stipulated by the revolutionary. And so in this way, a central feature of all revolutions, Camus says, is that the ends always justify the means. Everything is justified by the march of history. But for Camus, the ends never justify the means. No, for him, killing is pretty much always wrong, period. And that's because for him, human life has a supreme or an intrinsic value. Anyway, it's not really on the excess of revolutionary violence or what Camus calls rational murder that I want to focus in on here. No, it's more this idea that Camus emphasizes over and over again of the danger of thinking in terms of certainties or absolutes or binaries and acting on that kind of thinking. You see, Camus saw in his own time a propensity to deify totalizing ideologies and absolutist doctrines, both on the left and on the right. As he himself says there was a tendency to shape action to ideas and to fit the world into a theoretic frame. And this proves nothing but disastrous. To fit everything into a category, to be doctrinaire, to think that one has the definitive answers, to only see either or. This is no good, and it's not honest, nor is it productive. For Camus, the reality is that everything is provisional and partial, and so it's up for discussion and dialogue. When we're doctrinaire and binary in our thinking, we cut off alternative views and blind ourselves to other possibilities and to other voices out there, leaving us with a fractured world, a world where truth and humility are casualties of this fracture. And not only this, but when we're co-opted by abstract ideas and by ideologies, we blind ourselves to real life on the ground and to its vagaries and to its particularities, losing sight of texture and context, and ultimately of real flesh and blood human beings. Well, in The Rebel, Camus introduces an important concept that he calls measure. And it's this that he argues should be at the heart of all rebellion. And what does he mean by measure? Well, first and foremost, he means limit. And by limit here, technically, he means that when we revolt against oppression to defend our freedom and our lives, we have to, at the same time, make sure not to destroy the life and freedom of someone else. To trespass those limits, to take from others what you wouldn't want taken from you, to not preserve basic human values, that is when rebellion degrades into excess and into revolution. Okay, but by measure, he also means something else. He means not overreaching and not being dogmatic. And maybe the best way to get at the heart of this is by looking at one of Camus' most important intellectual and moral influences in life, namely ancient Greek tragedy. So the reason that Camus liked the Greek tragedians so much, like Aeschylus and Sophocles, is because they're able to examine the human condition with a kind of depth and a kind of nuance that philosophers are not capable of. Which is just to say that they show us the frightening complexity of the human condition, and that there are no easy answers, and that truths are partial and even often incommensurable. So when Camus speaks of measure, he means to try to bring back a sense of proportion or two-sidedness to things. He means to try to bring back a balance and a respect between competing views. Camus calls this mode of thought at the meridian. It's when we become suspicious of all absolutes and all stark dichotomies. It's when we drop all dogmatic thinking and admit that we are limited in our knowledge. It's when we maintain a principled opposition to all forms of simplification. It's when we allow contradictions to exist. It's when we proceed through careful trial and error. And really, what is all of this but a kind of humility and a kind of moderation? Now, here's the thing. Moderation. That's a word today that usually connotes a kind of weakness or indecisiveness, right? A lack of moral principles. But this just isn't right at all. No, it's those who are righteous and fanatic in their principles, and those who live in echo chambers, and those who threaten their critics, and those who adopt extremist and caricatured terminology, who pose the real threat. And this is what Camus was so worried about. And that's why, were he alive in these dark times, he would call for moderation. Bye for now.